Okay, I'm your second speaker today. My name is Chuck Beauchamp. I'm a professor of finance out at Mississippi College. Um, First thing I want to tell all of you, number one, it's great to see you here. I know that a Saturday could be used for a lot of other things, and I admire you for doing this. One thing that Reem said earlier, and she's right, we're losing the war, the intellectual war, on the idea of free markets, on the idea of capitalism, on the idea of freedom. Okay, and we're losing it at your age. So we need people fighting. And I'm going to talk to you today, one, about taking her points on morality and talking about what happens when these markets fail. Okay, well, I can tell you just in general, it enriches a small group of people and everyone else is left out in the cold. Okay, and then the second thing I'm going to talk to you about today is how do you argue these points? It's important. It's not just important to be able to say, that's not right. You have to be able to challenge people and argue with them and win those arguments. So I want to start with just a basic question. Can you have political freedom without economic freedom? No, it's completely impossible. And you can reverse the question and it's still completely impossible. Okay? You cannot be politically free without the freedom to freely exchange with one another. And you can't freely exchange with one another without having political freedom. Okay? It goes both ways. And that's a very important thing to understand. Here's the second thing to understand about freedom and economic freedom and free markets. Never in the history, never in recorded history, and I'm not talking about the history of the United States or the history of the United Kingdom. I'm talking about from when the Greeks began recorded history thousands of years ago. Never in recorded history have more people escaped poverty than have in the United States in the last 150 years. Never. Now, let's not just make that statement, okay? Let's put some stats on it. How many millionaires do you think live in this country alone? If you had to guess, how many? Remember, we're a country of 350 million people. 22 million. There are 22 million millionaires in this country. There are 700 to 800 billionaires in this country. Okay? But let's not focus on the upper 1%. And it's not even 1%, by the way, it's the upper 7%. 7% of this country is either a millionaire or a billionaire. Let's talk about poverty. Because one thing you hear in the media all the time is pitting. How many times have you heard this, if you've been studying this and watching? How many times have you heard a newscaster or somebody on TikTok or something pit rich against poor? Always. It's one of the easiest things to do. But where are we in the evolution of poverty in this country? In 1870, 45% of this country lived in poverty. Okay, in 1870. That's not that long ago in the grand scheme of history. Okay? If you did that today, okay, based on our population today, that would be 157 million people living in poverty right now. Well, we don't have that many. Okay? By the Depression era, which is marked as considered the worst economy in the history of our country, there were only 33% living in poverty. By the 1960s and 70s, we were down to 20%. And today, we're down to 11%. Now, why? What makes us different? What makes us different? Free markets. Okay? Free markets and capitalism. I want you to understand something else. The war that we're having between freedom and a lack of freedom is not just in the United States. It's all over the world. And it's accelerating. Why does this matter? Because there are global forces that are pushing this. In the United States, it's always framed as Republican versus Democrat. If you go to the United Kingdom, it's conservatives versus labor and so forth. Every country has the same argument going on. Okay, you need to understand that. I want you, for those of you taking notes, I want you to write down 3 questions. And these are the most powerful three questions in this argument. And I promise you, if you ask these three questions when you're in one of these debates, they're not going to win the debate. You're going to win it. And these are not my questions. These are a famous economist by the name of Thomas Sowell. Okay, and Thomas Sowell, I would advise every one of you over the next week or so, when you're thinking back on this, Google Thomas Sowell and watch some of his YouTube videos. He's excellent. Question number one, whenever they propose something, you ask compared to what? And I'm going to go through some of these questions with some of the examples today. So question number one, compared to what? Question number two, at what cost? And remember, cost is not always money. Cost can be freedom and other ideas. And question number three, and this is the one, if they can make it past questions 1 and 2, question 3 always crushes them. What evidence do you have to support your argument? What evidence do you have to support your argument? Now, just keep those three questions in mind as we go through some of these topics today. The first, before I get to the first topic, I want to ask one more question. What's the biggest issue in our upcoming presidential election? What do you think?
The economy.
The economy. Absolutely the economy. So why are people hurting so much? Why are people hurting so much? 2 reasons. Inflation is number one. Okay, inflation is number one. What is inflation?
It's when the dollar decreases value.
Yeah, most people always say it's when the dollar decreases in value. The dollar can't purchase as much as it used to. What causes it? We never get to that point. We always just say what it is. What causes it?
Printing money.
Yeah, it's too much money. Inflation is simple. It's too much money chasing too few goods. Okay, too much money chasing too few goods. Well, where does the money come from? Government prints it. Okay, you and I don't have the ability to reduce the supply of money. Only the government can do that, and only the government can expand it. So, why are people hurting so much? Number one is inflation. What's the scale of the problem? That's important to understand. If I asked you to stack dollar bills up every second, I gave you an unlimited supply of dollar bills, and I asked you to stack one every second, how long would it take you, do you think, to stack 1 million of them? Basically, I'm asking you, how long does it take to accrue 1 million seconds? It's 11.5 days. Okay? 11.5 days. Now, how much money does this government, just the United States, how much money do we owe? Do y'all have a clue? How much? Almost 36 trillion. We're adding $1 trillion every 100 days. Okay? That's unbelievable. If I were to have you do the same thing, stack up the $1 bills every second, how many years do you think it would take for you to stack up 36 trillion $1 bills if you were doing it every second, nonstop? 1 million. It would take 1 million years. That's the scale of the problem. That's why we have inflation in this country. Now, when Reem was talking earlier, she was talking about the morality of the free market. Inflation crushes the free market. It crushes it because people are not able to voluntarily interact with one another. Yeah, you are. I can still say yes or no in a market, but I'm doing it with a dollar or with whatever currency you're dealing with that's a lot less valuable than it was a year ago, a decade ago. Okay? And that hinders people, and people are hurting because of it. The other thing, and before I say what I'm about to say, I want to preface it with something. I am in no way anti-immigrant. Okay? As I was telling the guys in the back, my grandmother was an immigrant. Okay? But one of the issues that we are facing, again, not just in this country, but in these other countries, is government-supported migration. Okay? Government-supported migration. It's not the same thing as free market immigration. okay? And I'm going to come back to this in a minute. But it's also driving some of the economic issues that we're seeing, okay? And I'm going to talk about it more in just a few minutes as one of the topics. One thing I heard Reem say several times, and she's exactly right, is we're losing this war on TikTok. Capitalism has become almost a bad word or a bad topic for people your age. You know, if we survey people your age, they say, oh, capitalism, that's terrible. It disenfranchises people. It does this, it does that. But as soon as we turn around and we say, how about free enterprise? That's the greatest thing in the world. So you have to learn how to speak some of this language, okay? People want to argue against capitalism, fine. Just ignore it, speak about it in free enterprise, and then circle back around at the end of the argument and say, hey, by the way, free enterprise and capitalism are pretty much the same thing, okay? Keep that in mind. That's how you argue with this. And all of this evolves. Douglas can tell you, when he and I were coming up younger in the 1980s, early 1990s, capitalism was a great word. Everybody loved capitalism. But we've evolved over the 20-year span, 30-year span since that, and it's no longer, okay? So keep that in mind. So the first topic I want to bring up today, kind of introducing all that, is the concept of government investment. And this is one of the first failures of markets. Barack Obama started this, and all of these politicians, by the way, on the national level, they use these words because they poll well, okay, or poor negatively, whatever they're trying to convey. And at some point, the Obama team polled people, and they found that using the term government investment was a positive, and he took off with it, okay? Here's the little secret. Governments don't invest, okay? Governments don't invest. They redistribute people's money. All right? What is an investment? When you think of an investment, what is it? You putting your money at risk, hoping to grow that money. That's all an investment is. But is there a chance that you don't grow the money? Sure there is. There's also a chance you lose the money. Okay? So what does that make us as investors do? It makes us do our homework. It makes us only enter into investments that we want to enter into. And that's the key. And if you were listening to Reem earlier, she was talking about the voluntary exchange. Investing is voluntary exchange too. But when we first started seeing this on the scale we are now under the Obama administration, and Joe Biden has really amped it up, and Donald Trump to a certain extent, they use this, we're going to invest in this, we're going to invest in that. The government, if the government loses on an investment, guess who really loses? The people, yeah, the taxpayers, okay? And they're just giving money away. They're not investing. Investing, like I said, is part you do your due diligence. You see how good is this investment? Is there a potential upside? And you weigh it against the downside, okay? Governments don't do that. They just pass money out. And here's what you're going to be told. When you argue against that, the first thing they're going to throw back in your face, well, the oil companies get subsidies. Elon Musk gets subsidies. Okay? Fine. Here's your retort to that. Cancel them all. The government shouldn't be giving subsidies to anybody in a free market system. Let the free market fare for itself. Okay? And when you do that, money moves to the best places, and the economic benefits are maximized. What's the worst case scenario of this government investment? Well, you start seeing politicians enrich themselves and their friends. Just this week in Mississippi, we had 2 stories come out in the news. One was up in Tate County. And anybody see this? You remember what it was?
Trey Lamar, he pretty much Christmas tree spending, and it's like Christmas in March and April for legislators. They get to bring back home money for their county.
Yeah, right around $10 million he took back to his county, which is Tate County, and all of it went to a little development that he lives in.
A golf course.
A little golf course. What?
He's my neighbor.
He's your neighbor? Okay. Well, you benefited from it. Congratulations. But did the rest of Tate County benefit from it? No. Okay, no. This is a big deal. Now, he's a Republican, right? Yeah. So what I'm saying, this is not always a Republican versus Democrat thing. Also this week, we had a Hinds County legislator that had steered money to specific streets that benefited, I can't remember if it was him or her, but benefited that person in their little community. But again, if you ride around Hinds County, there are a lot more streets and roads that need to be taken care of than just that little one, okay? Those are the kind of things that happen when free markets fall apart. Second thing, the second topic today, consumer and employee protection. This is a big deal in Washington. We don't see it as much on the state level, but again, this breaks down free markets. The biggest purveyor of this information in Washington is the senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren. Okay, she's all into the consumer protection. And basically what she says is this: the individual is not smart enough to know if they're getting a good interest rate from the bank. So the government, needs to tell them it's a good interest rate or not. Now, what is an interest rate? An interest rate is just the price of money. Okay? Are you telling me that if an individual, an adult, goes into a bank and the bank says, look, the best we can do on your loan is 6.5%. Do they not know if that's a good rate or not? Of course they know. If that's not a good rate, what do?
Go to our bank.
You go to another bank. You go to another bank. But here's the problem. For Elizabeth Warren and company to pull all of that off, they pass all these regulations onto these banks. And it freezes their interest rates all in these narrow ranges. So it keeps us from shopping for better rates. What happens when you can't shop for something?
You're restricted.
You're restricted. You pay the price. It's similar to going to the doctor. If you go to the doctor for a checkup and you get a good report, what do? You go home, live life. If you go to the doctor and something shows up, what do a lot of people do?
Get treatment.
Well, they will treat it, but what do they do first? They either go to a specialist for a second opinion or go to another specialist for a second opinion. That's shopping. Okay? Pricing is the same thing. Okay? Pricing is the same thing. If I go to Best Buy and I need a new laptop or iPad or whatever, I'm going to know if it's a good price or not. And if it's not a good price, I'm going somewhere else. And I'm going to keep shopping until I find the price that matches the value I want to spend on it. But when the government gets involved and they put all these regulations on banks and financial institutions and other players in the economy, it restricts choice. It restricts free movement. It just restricts free markets. Okay? That's a huge, huge issue. The next thing, one of the most controversial ways that the government, quote, protects people is minimum wage laws. Everybody know what a minimum wage law is? What do politicians always want to do with minimum wages? Raise them. They always want to raise them. Here's your argument against it. The real minimum wage is always zero. Okay? The argument against raising minimum wages is that the real minimum wage is always zero. What does that mean? You have to be able to back it up. It's not just being able to say it. You have to what does that mean?
If people make more, then people charge more for stuff because there's more money available to spend.
Well, it is too. That's part of it. It makes prices go up, but there's more to it than that. If I'm a business owner and the government tells me you have to pay this 18-year-old kid with no experience, no skills, $25 an hour, am I going to do that? No. What am I going to do? I'm going to outsource it, maybe overseas, okay, where people will work way cheaper than that, okay? Here's the thing to remember. There's a value for labor. There's a value. When you go to work for someone, you bring a certain level of value, and they're not going to pay you more than that value. What are minimum wage laws designed for? They are designed for the lowest value labor in the country. Okay? And that sounds harsh, but it's reality. Now, go back to the three questions. Compared to what, at what cost, and what data do we have? If you want to raise minimum wage laws, compared to what? Well, it's easy. Compared to the current one. Fine. Hard to win that argument. Go to the next one. At what cost? Well, who's going to bear the cost of minimum wage laws? The business owner and the consumer. Fine. And here's the argument that the left always uses on you on that. Well, if they can't afford to pay higher wages, they're not a very good business owner, which is the most preposterous thing in the world, but just keep it at that. Go to question 3, and here's where you get them. What data do you have to support your argument? They don't have any, okay? They don't. But here's the data you have to support not raising minimum wage. They tried it in California. How'd it go?
Not very well.
It went terrible. Who did they raise minimum wage laws on? Fast food workers. The first month, 10,000 lost their jobs. In 30 days, 10,000 people lost their jobs. Anybody see what Elon Musk did yesterday, what he debuted yesterday? The robots. And did you see what one of the robots was doing?
He was handing out like, it was something in a bag, I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, he was a waiter. Okay, he was a waiter. These robots are coming on very quickly. He was a bartender, actually. He was making drinks. It wasn't just, here's a mixed drink, and a robot picked it up, set on the counter. He made the drink. Okay? When you can start replacing people with automation, minimum wage laws become even more dangerous. And the other thing, and back to the topic of the day, free markets. Whenever minimum wage laws are in place, it eliminates the worker and the business owner's voluntary exchange. If I want a job with you, I come to you and I say, I would like this job, whatever. And if you like me, you offer to pay me X. If I don't like it, I go to the next job. It doesn't work like that with minimum wage laws. I'm going to circle back to minimum wage again in a minute when we combine it with a school topic. Okay? One thing you see right now, we're living through right now, these 2 disastrous hurricanes. And the first thing that politicians say every time a hurricane blows into place, into Florida, Mississippi, wherever, they say, anybody caught price gouging is going to go to prison. We're going to lower the boom on them from the Attorney General's office. That's the most ridiculous statement that politicians ever make around storms. Okay? Again, it erases the free market. Somebody make the argument, who cares if gasoline goes up to $10 a gallon during a storm? Make the positive on that. Can you do it? Can anybody argue that positively? Everybody can argue it negatively. You just say it's price gouging and it's unfair and you shouldn't do it.
Supply and demand.
Yeah, explain it.
Well, if you have gas that's rare in a time of hurricane, like trucks can't get there, and it's going to go up because there's
Right.
no supply.
Right. What's gas right now in Mississippi? $2.50, $2.80? I haven't filled up in a week or two. Yeah, something, so somewhere between $2.50 and $3. Okay, Mississippi. If they need gas really badly in Florida, which they do right now, and they're charging $10 a gallon, what are the gas companies going to do? They're going to divert supply from Mississippi down to Florida. And yeah, the gas companies are going to make a lot of money, but who cares? The people that need the gas are getting it. You see the argument there? Okay? So again, anytime government does that type of thing, it restricts our ability to free markets. The last one, and Reem touched on this with the UK, and so did Douglas, the UK's socialized medicine. And look, we're the only industrialized world without it. We're the last one standing that doesn't have socialized medicine. And here you will hear the politicians say, health care is a right. Health care is a right. And here's your argument, how can something be a right if I have to take from one person or a group of people to give that, quote, right to the other people? It's not a right. At that point, it becomes an entitlement, okay? That's a huge issue. And again, it restricts us from making free market decisions. There's a hospital in Oklahoma that does all cash medical procedures, including surgeries. Okay, and I'm a college professor, so I deal with college athletes all the time, and they're getting hurt all the time. I have one hurt right now, a football player, and he's looking at surgery in the next 2 weeks, and he and I were talking about it. It's going to be $50-something thousand. He could go to the surgery center of Oklahoma City, surgery center of Tulsa. You can Google it. They put all of their prices online. He could go up there and get the same surgery, all included, hospital stay, doctors, anesthesiologists, everything, for $12,000. That's when the government gets involved and they force these mandates through insurance or through some type of socialized medicine, the price always goes up. Okay, the price always goes up because people aren't shopping anymore. Okay, people aren't shopping anymore.
I think too, one of the things with that is like, if people see that government's gonna get involved, they start like raising prices because they can get more out of the
Oh,
government.
absolutely, absolutely. If you go back to the UK's experience too, if you look at the history of the socialized medicine in the UK, the demand was so great when it first started, and I don't remember when it first started, in the 60s?
1948.
48. The demand was so great in the first year, the prime minister had to go on radio and TV and ask people to stop using it. Okay, whenever something is, quote, free, number one, it's not free. Someone's paying for it. But when it's, quote, free, we're going to overconsume it. Okay, we're going to overconsume it. And the quality is going to come down. And that's exactly what Douglas was describing earlier. Topic number 3. Has anybody ever heard of creative destruction? What is it?
I don't know, I think I've heard of it.
It sounds cool, doesn't it? Creative destruction is imperative in a free market system. Okay? It's imperative in a free market system. And it's basically summarized as this. We need businesses to fail. Okay? And no, I'm not saying we need an epidemic of business failures. We don't. But we need unprofitable and poorly run and poorly designed ideas to fail. We need that. Why? Because the money that was supporting them will then migrate in the economy to better ideas, to better run businesses. That's how economic growth occurs, okay, through that creative destruction. But again, when we have politicians that are propping up these businesses, it prevents creative destruction, okay? Right now, and if you Google this term after the session today, you'll see this. There are literally hundreds of thousands of businesses in the United States that are called zombie companies. Their financials are a disaster. Their structures are terrible. Okay, they're just bad businesses. They need to go away. But for one reason or another, the government has propped them up. Okay? And it's not them saying, hey, I'm a bad business, I'm going to go to the government and apply for some kind of funding or anything. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the government has so many little things in place, little programs in place, that they can draw money from here or draw sales from here or whatever. And it keeps them going like a zombie. They need to die, but they don't because they're being propped up by the government. Now, who pays for that?
Taxpayers.
The taxpayers pay for it directly. We all pay for it indirectly through an inefficient economy, okay? Because when these free markets are working the way they should, the economy expands, and we're all better off, okay? Remember the stats from earlier. If we're not better off, our economy's been growing for the most part for 150. Ever since the Civil War ended, the United States economy exploded, okay? And look at the stats I gave you earlier. There's a famous book on creative destruction that I would suggest you read. If you go to college and you have to do some type of report and you do this, be prepared that your very likely liberal professor will hate you, but it's a good book, and it's called Atlas Shrugged. Okay, has anybody ever heard of this book? If you do choose to do it, get started early. It's like this thick, but it is a great book, okay, Atlas Shrugged. It's written by a lady by the name of Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand was someone that had survived communism, immigrated to the United States, and basically said, I'm going to write these, they're basically very long parables about her experiences, and she made them modern so people would understand them, about her experiences in communism and how it fails. Last topic is understand this. Free markets are not always about money and the economy, okay? They can be about other topics. Number one, let's go back to migration. We were talking about it earlier. If you listen to the politicians, okay, if you listen to the politicians right now, the second biggest issue in this election is illegal immigration, okay? The first one, of course, is the economy. The second one is illegal immigration. How many illegal immigrants have come here in the last 4 years?
A few million.
10 million. Now, again, you have to scale the problem. You have to understand the scale of the problem. If you listen to, again, the politicians and some in the media, they've been quoting this $11 to $15 million term, figure, my entire adult life. It's impossible that we still only have 11 to 15 million illegals. They were saying that in the late 1990s. And we've had millions coming here ever since. And we don't have millions going back, so we're not netting, it's not netting to zero. In the last 4 years, we've had 10 million. Now, why does this matter? Because every one of these people will say, hey, we're a nation of immigrants. And that's very true. But the difference, and they always point back to the early 1900s when we had the European wave of immigrants come over. The difference is this. When those immigrants arrived here, there were no government benefits. None. They came here and they got involved in the economy. And the proof of that is this. If you ever go to New York, if you ever go to New York City, one thing you want to see, and it's just a tourist attraction now, is Little Italy, okay? If you look at history books, Little Italy used to consume blocks and blocks and blocks of Manhattan, okay? Every fire hydrant was painted like the Italian flag. They were very proud. Little Italy today is 2 blocks, that's it, basically, of tourist restaurants and tourist shops. Well, what happened?
They didn't need to provide for themselves.
They just assimilated. They assimilated into the country, okay? But they didn't have all these government benefits that the illegal immigrants are getting today. So there's no incentive to assimilate quickly like the Italians did and the other Europeans. That's point number one. Point number two, there's also an economic part of this that's eliminating free markets again. You have these people coming in. They have to live somewhere, okay? We have 10 million people come in 4 years. How many houses do you think we can build a year in this country? 1.3 million, okay? That's our max output right now, 1.3 million. Well, if we're bringing 10 million in per year, this doesn't even count the new people getting married and things, and legal immigration coming in. We need a lot more than 1.3 million. What's that going to do to housing prices? Increases them, okay? Same thing with food. Same thing with food. We have not increased the food capacity in this country in a decade. If anything, we've shrunk it, okay? That's a problem, okay, when you bring that many people in so quickly. All right, so that eliminates again, free markets. The other item, and this is something that this center has worked tirelessly on and is going to keep working on, school choice. Okay, school choice. Schooling should also be a free market concept. Is it a free market concept in the United States the way we have it set up now? No. There are some people that go to private schools. I'm sure some of you in here are private school kids, okay? Those of us can afford it. We choose to send our kids there, but a lot of people can't. Should that be a barrier to a good education? No. Why not let states say, okay, we're allocating $9,000, $10,000, whatever, per kid. Why not give it to the parents and say, get your kid educated at the best school for your kid? Okay, that's a free market transaction. The current status quo of, hey, you live in this zip code, you send your kid to this school, whether it's a good school or not, is not a free market transaction. What's the result?
Bad schools because there's no competition.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's no competition. So bad schools. Now, I'm not saying every public school is a bad school. They're not. Look, I teach kids all the time. I've been teaching for 20 years. I have seen great students come out of public schools, private schools, and home schools. I've also seen terrible students come out of all three, okay? But give the parents the choice, okay? And you're right, the public schools will get better or they will shut down. And that's creative destruction. And here's the other thing on the school choice. The people that argue against it argue it like the number of schools we have right now is static and we can never build new schools. If you put that money into the hands of parents, you will see new schools pop up. Schools that teach differently than the current way we teach. Because there are kids that we know now that learn better one-on-one than they do sitting in chairs all day long. Okay? There's a lot more to education than we've given credit for the last 100 years. But if you don't enable the free market, nothing's going to change. Okay? Do you have a question?
I think people too also like look at schools when they like move.
Of course they do.
So
Of course they do.
there's no like there's no option, so people might not move to certain areas because the school's bad.
Of course, of course. So there's economic implications of that as well. I made this point last year, and I'm going to make it again. And it's kind of off the topic of free markets, but it really ties it all together. Here's something on the school choice thing. In this country, I think one of the greatest drivers or one of the most racist things we do in this country is combine failing public schools with minimum wage laws. Think about that for a second. We put kids into schools that are failing those children. When you put a kid in a failing school, they come out with a lower quality of education. That lowers their probability for success. And if someone can't come out of a school with skills and knowledge, what's their chance in the job market? It's low. So how do they overcome that? They need to get a job, but the minimum wage laws then turn around and prevent them from getting a job. Okay? And now why do I say this is a big racial issue? If you look at the stats, where are the majority of failing public schools in this country located? They're located in high population centers, okay? Big cities, and what the demographic shows is that overwhelmingly impacts people of color, okay? It overwhelmingly impacts people of color. So why not allow free market movement of everyone to whatever school they want to go to? And it eliminates one of the problems. It doesn't eliminate the minimum wage problem, but it eliminates the low quality of education problem. Okay?
I guess,
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And the point here, though, is let people freely move to wherever they're going to get the best education.
Right.
That's the key, and that enables upward mobility for everyone.
I completely agree with everything you said. I live in the Delta. I live in Cleveland, just dead center of the Delta, Bolivar County, and we have a D-rated school, and our middle school near us is an F-rated school. Very poor education, and our city is 95-10, or 95-5. And I feel like if we did get the education better, maybe some of those like northern Arkansas businesses would move over.
It's not just making businesses move. It's enabling people to grow. Okay? And by that, I mean grow in their education, grow in entrepreneurial ability, grow in maybe becoming a doctor, lawyers, and so forth, maybe becoming skilled craftsmen. But when you restrict education, it sets people on a path that's hard to break that chain, okay, or hard to break that path. Did you have a question?
So my mom is a dyslexia therapist,
Mhm.
and so I live in Simpson County, and recently the Simpson County public schools, they ended their dyslexia program. And so there's kids that have learning differences in those schools that, I go to a private school, but like their parents can't pay to
Mhm.
send their kids to a private school. So like, if you had more options for them, you know, there could be education provided to those students.
Absolutely. How many of you in here have ever heard of a micro school? What is it?
It's like it's a smaller scale of a bigger school that teaches the same principles.
Yeah. I mean, think about it like this. Let's say the state allocates $10,000 per kid and gives it to parents. How much does a school teacher make? What? Not a lot. 40, 45, 50,000 at the most. If a school teacher took it upon his or herself to say, okay, I'm going to teach 5th grade only, and they located an area and they said, I'm going to take 15 students at $10,000. How much revenue is that? That's $150,000. You deduct the expenses. I promise you that teacher's going to make more money than they would make as a teacher in a public school or private school, either way. Why am I saying this? Because if you give people the freedom to choose, new ideas and new opportunities always pop up. And we will see teachers do that. We will see principals do that. It's happening already all over the country where we have voucher programs. Okay? So, and I don't want to get too far into this school topic. It was just a way for me to show you that there's more to free markets than just money. It's also about ideas, and it's about school choice, and it's about health care. And free markets benefit way more people than they don't, okay? And all the alternatives are the exact opposite, okay? So in closing, and then I'll answer any more questions you might have, here's what I would challenge you to do. You have to educate yourself on these topics. You have to. If you're going to argue with people on TikTok or on Twitter or on whatever media, your social media you're on, you have to be ready for the argument. You cannot get in the argument and then try to go back to it, because the arguments don't last long anymore. Okay? They're digital and they're quick. You've got to be ready to go. Those 3 questions I gave you earlier should help you a great deal. I was going to say, and Reem beat me to it, the deal about iPencil. I even brought one to talk about it, okay? But here's what I would extend the iPencil thing. She brought up Milton Friedman. In my opinion, Milton Friedman is the greatest economist that probably the world's ever seen, okay? His ideas absolutely withstand the test of time, all right? There's a free, online, okay, online. If you Google free to choose, in the late 1970s, he put out a 10-part series on different topics about free markets, basically. And they're all out there. They are excellent. They are excellent. He covers education. He covers money. He covers all different topics. They're excellent. They will, even though they were in the 1970s, they will prepare you for today. And then the last thing, if you don't get anything else from me today, take this home with you and tell anybody that'll listen to you. The biggest threat to all of our freedom right now is the idea of central bank digital currencies. Okay? That's the biggest threat to our freedom. And again, if you go back to the 3 questions, what data do we have to support this? China. They're already doing it. And here's what happens in China. You, according to the government, use too much carbon this week. Next week, your grocery allowance is reduced. Does that sound like freedom? No, but here's the thing. On a central bank digital currency, the green stuff in your pocket, cash, disappears. It completely disappears. Someone or something controls your allocation of money through a central bank digital currency. Oh, you went to a protest for this or that? Well, we're going to need to reduce your allowance this week. There's no greater way to control people than what I just described. And it is the greatest threat to free markets that you especially are going to deal with throughout the rest of your life. Never give in to it, ever. I don't care who proposes it, it will be turned against us at some point. Okay? Keep that in mind. And that's it. Any questions? Any other questions?
So if we could go back to the minimum wage for a little
Yeah.
bit. So in Scandinavia, they have sectoral bargaining, so they don't have minimum wage laws, they just have sectoral bargaining. Is that something you would like support?
I'm not sure how that works. I would be lying to you if I said yes or no. I'm not informed on how that works. Do you know how it works?
So basically, the labor unions in Scandinavia get together and they bargain for their wage with the employer. They don't have a minimum wage law or anything like that. It's just left up to the workers to bargain with their employer.
Do the unions have government support?
I'm not entirely.
That's the real question. If they have government support, it's not a free market. Okay? If they do have government support, if they don't have government support, then it's a free market, and I wouldn't have a problem with it. But that's the problem with unions. If unions have government support, then they can crush businesses, and it's no longer a free market. It's, hey, the government's going to ultimately dictate what I'm paying this person if a union's involved in this country.
If I could just add to that, so I think what's interesting about Sweden as an example, where they don't have any minimum wage laws at all, is that unions and employers do negotiate freely. But as you said, because unions effectively, in the same way, lobby governments for special privileges, so for example, the fact that unions are able to withdraw their labour, they're able to effectively strike, and they're not allowed to be fired as a result of that, means that the government have implemented all of these special privileges that mean that unions are protected in a special way that other organisations aren't. I'd also say that the difference between a free market and a system of sort of state monopolies is that in a free market, if, for example, I work in a comms job at a think tank, if I don't like my job, I can go somewhere else. There are other options available. If I am, for example, a National Health Service worker in the health sector in the UK, I only have one employer, that is the government or indeed taxpayers. So ultimately, the collective sort of bargaining power you have with the market is so much more significant than the bargaining power you have in the public sector, and that's why you see strikes happening so much more often in the government sector than you do in the private sector. Because in the private sector, you don't need to strike. If you don't like your job, you go somewhere else. You've got that negotiating power.
Sounds like the big protests that happened in Hollywood in like the 1960s or something. When there
Yeah,
was,
it's
like,
similar.
riot and stuff.
The key is, as Reem said, I said, if the government's involved with a union, it's not a free market. If you have a union and the government's not protecting it, it's still somewhat a free market. It might be cloudy a little bit, but if the government's not protecting it, it's still a free market because the people can still leave. The real problem with unions in this country, and I can't speak to the other countries, not in Mississippi because we're a right-to-work state, but there are some states in this country where you can't become a plumber without joining the union. Now think about that. You have to go to school to become a plumber, okay? But you can't become a plumber without joining the union and paying their dues. Why? Why? Why shouldn't an individual be able to become a plumber and then go out and find their own jobs, charge whatever prices? That's the other part of unions. When you're a laborer like that, a skilled laborer, you have to charge the prices they tell you can charge, not the prices that you think you should charge. And that, again, is basically crushing the free markets. So you have all of these powers that are out there trying to eliminate free market forces. I would much rather a plumber come to my house and he and I, or she and I, discuss the price and the value of fixing whatever I need fixed. But in those states, it doesn't work like that. The price for snaking this drain is $500. Fine, do it or live with it. That's the deal. There's no free market. That's a big problem. Okay? Any other questions?
So as far as the legal immigration thing in the economy, do you think that the legal immigrants are sending money back home to where they came
Probably.
from, and it's making a deficit in the economy?
Probably. No, that doesn't really, that's not a big issue. Yeah, there are a lot of immigrants here that are working to support family back home. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But it needs to be done legally. And there needs to be hey, if you're going to be in this country, we need to know who you are, number one. But number two, we need to be able to track all of this stuff, okay? Because again, it erodes the ability of free markets to operate. Anything else? Any other questions? Thank you, guys.